3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. It is the voice of atheism in Florida here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Ed Golly with Jim Peterson and Joe Reinhardt in the studio, where you can offer up your opinion on the program today. Just pick up the phone and call 441-3000. You can check in on our website at A of F, Atheists of Florida, or talk.aof.ngo, or insult an atheist for only $2. Joining us today by telephone from Madison, Wisconsin, is Dan Barker, who, with Annie Laurie Gaylor, are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation and co-hosts of Free Thought Radio. Now, Dan is a former minister and evangelist who has a great story about conversion, became a free thinker in 1983. A couple of his notable books include Just Pretend, a free thought book for children, and Losing Faith in Faith, From Preacher to Atheist. Graduate of Azusa Pacific University with a degree in religion, Dan Barker now puts his knowledge of Christianity to effective free thought use. Dan, thank you very much for giving us some of your time today and joining us here on the Atheist Forum from Clearwater, Florida. And tell us, if you would, about your new book to begin with.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your show. So, yes, I have book number 10, just came out last month. It's called Mere Morality. And this one has no subtitle. It's nice when a title can be short. Mere Morality. And I think a lot of your listeners will get the title because it parallels that famous theological book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity. And C.S. Lewis, he wrote the Narnia series and a whole bunch of other books. And in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis tried to strip down all the dispensable, non-essential doctrines to get down to the mere core, the mere Christianity that all Christians share in common, regardless of their differences. I don't know if he succeeded or not, but what I'm trying to do the same thing with morality. What is the basic core of morality that all human beings share, Christian or believer or not, what we think is good? And C.S. Lewis would not have agreed with me that religion is one of those dispensable or discretionary items that can be removed from morality. But at least he would have understood and appreciated my approach, trying to get it down to the core.
So what do you think is the core? What from whence does our morality come?
So, yeah, it doesn't come from anywhere. It's not a thing that can come from or even have an origin. Morality is a issue. It's a concept of how should we treat each other? How do human beings treat, first of all, other human beings, and then, of course, other creatures and the environment. So morality is basically minimizing harm. And if you had to summarize morality in just one word, it would be the word harm. Look for the harm, and you will have a guide for how to proceed. So, when you look at all the religions of the world, if you were to put all the religions of the world like a smorgasbord, and say, oh, here's one here, here's Hinduism, here's Mormonism, and so on, and you were to judge them on moral grounds, which one is the best one and which one is the worst, if you were to try to do that, you would be engaging in an exercise that transcends the religions. You'd be using a system of morality, and you would be using harm. You'd say this religion causes more harm than that one, so that one's not as good as that one. So that's a principle that's available to all of us, whether you're a believer or an atheist or whatever. We look at the harm, and if you want to be a moral person, then you will act with the intention of minimizing or lessening overall harm. And I call it a compass, really. A compass doesn't tell you where you are, and it doesn't even tell you where to go. It just tells you where north is. So as we navigate the moral difficulties of life, we can have, in the book I use the compass, the 3 moral minds, to help us guide.
Would you think that because human beings are essentially social creatures, that we necessarily depend on cooperation in order to even exist. And that cooperation, in turn, depends upon some sort of moral arrangements, even from the very beginning of our species. So that it's not really, it doesn't have anything to do with God per se or with religion. It's all about maintaining the existence of our species. Is this
Yeah, and
tenable?
I think you're right, and I think that's basically definitional or tautological even.
Mhm.
We're social creatures. Do we want to value and continue our lives and our group and our tribe and our species and our planet? So yeah, of course we did evolve altruism and empathy and caring and loving. We evolved all those things. We also evolved violent tendencies, for self-defense. We evolved, we have these canine teeth in the front of our mouth that were evolved to rip open flesh. And so,
Woof.
even the most gentle, loving mother who's a pacifist, even she will become a wild, violent animal if somebody's attacking her kids. We have built into us mechanisms for both. But you're right. As social creatures, we have to get along with each other, and we are basically animals, and we evolved, inherited from our ancestors, instincts. And I think instinct is one of the three guides that give us that moral compass in our life.
Mm-hmm.
Could you make a point or a comment having to do with evolving our morality? In fact, that we are more moral than our Bible. If we live by the Old Testament, we'd be awfully lucky to escape the death penalty. So the question that I always pose is, it appears that we've become better people, not because of religion, but in spite of it. Do you take issue with that at all?
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right. Because most religions, especially the biblical religion from the Bible that I used to preach, teach that real behavior, good behavior, is obedience and submission to the master, to the Lord. In fact, if you read the Bible, that's basically what you see. About 90% or even more of the Bible has to do not with humans treating other humans, but humans treating God. It's a vertical thing, and so you're judged by how righteous you are, how much you glorify this God, how much you obey this God. And especially in the Old Testament, for example, and nowhere in the Bible, Old or New Testament, where you even find the word morality or ethics, but especially in the Old Testament, if you look at words like evil and wicked, and I have a whole section in my book looking at the words evil and wicked through the Bible, which appear about 1,000 times in English. About 95% of the time, the words evil and wicked have nothing to do with what you and I would call moral behavior, like human to humans. How should we treat each other? It almost always has to do with how we treat God. For example, the biggest sin in the Bible is idolatry. If you look at it, if you build an idol, another idol or an image, in fact, that's right in the Ten Commandments. It comes even before the human to human things that are in the Ten Commandments. Is don't make yourself idols. And then the next one is the Sabbath, not honoring the Sabbath. And then interracial marriage or interreligious marriage is another big, wrong, immoral thing in the Bible. People were killed because they married outside of the religion and outside of the tribe. And then disobedience. And so about roughly 5% of the time, maybe a little more, you do find a connection between evil and wicked that has something to do with human behavior. For example, if you have a stubborn and rebellious son and he's a glutton and a drunkard, well, then you should put him to death. Yeah. And I think we would all agree that their drunkenness and gluttony is problematic. I think we would agree with that. But I doubt that we all agree that it merits the death penalty.
I think you should just take away his car keys and his allowance.
Well, okay. Well, there you go. But the point is that you do sometimes find those words connected with what you and I might call moral human behavior or behavior that would potentially harm another human being. But it's very rare. The Bible is really vertical distraction from real morality where we live. It's pleasing this authority figure, which is a might makes right. Follow the code, follow a list of rules to be told that you're a good person. And when you do that, you run the danger, which we've seen through history, of totally divorcing yourself from the morality that really matters, the morality of our families, our love, our kids, our tribe in that. And of course, the holy wars follow, and the genocides follow from all of that.
I'm fascinated by that expression, might makes right. The whole reason we have laws is because that sentence is so untrue, right? Otherwise, why do we have laws against rape or theft or imperialism, right? There would be no such laws if it's simply a matter of might makes right. And yet I hear people say that as if that solves everything, that resolves everything. That's all you need to know. And I think it's
Yeah.
because, to me, religion tries to simplify everything. It puts these issues in black and white terms so that they're easy to understand and easy to follow, easy to be obedient to.
Yeah, and I think you're right, but we have to be careful to distinguish between good humanistic laws and other types of laws that could be autocratic or tyrannical or dictatorial. So in the case of a dictatorship, might actually does make right, not in a moral sense, but in the sense of, well, you're not going to survive if you don't follow these laws. But if you're lucky enough to live in a country that has evolved humanistic laws that are based not on the glory of a dictator or a sovereign or a king or a master, but that are based on the concept of harm, well, then yes, I think your point is exactly right.
I had a question a little bit going back a little further in your history. I've read your Losing Faith in Faith, which I think was your first book. I'm not sure. And I was taken with how you were always grateful to Jesus for helping you find a parking space, etc. But I wondered, what is it like to go through life pretending to believe in the unbelievable? Did you find that even when you were a sincere believer, did you find it difficult to go around pretending, or did you know you were pretending? It's hard to identify with that.
Well, it was wonderful. It was an amazing feeling and an amazing life. And in my case, it was all pretty good. I didn't have any disappointments. A lot of Christians try to say, well, Dan, what went wrong? Did somebody...
Yeah, you hate God.
And,
right?
but I did not know I was pretending. I would not have imagined that would be like calling me a liar. And I believed every word of the Bible. I thought I was talking with God. I heard this voice of God, not an audible voice, but you know what I mean, in my head. I got goosebumps when I prayed. I often saw what I was convinced were answers to prayer. I had this wonderful, warm, the Bible talks about a peace that passes understanding and the joy of the Spirit. And I had all of that. And you can't say that doesn't happen. The religious experience is a very real experience. And I've had atheists tell me, well, Dan, you must have been just lying or pretending. No. The religious experience is very real. It's very powerful. It happens in all religions. The Muslims will tell you the same thing.
Sure.
And so I think it's a mistake to just dismiss the religious experience as some kind of a lie or a pretense, because something's going on in the brain. And it's actually, I think there's even chemicals that are released, similar to how when you're making love or eating chocolate or listening to music or there's things that happen in the brain. And when you're in a religious experience, it's very powerful, and it gives this huge illusion that you are connected with something transcendent, something that integrates yourself, and it gives you this feeling of peace, and I'm accepted, I'm loved. And I even had this, almost a image of a parent figure up in the top of my brain, just, reassuring me. So it was great. It was amazing. And I would walk up to someone like you blind, ignorant skeptics, you guys. I would walk up to you and I would wonder, what's wrong with you that you don't see this and don't want this? You must be blind. There must be something you guys are missing. And I would think that once you looked into my eyes and you saw the love and the depth and the reality, that you would be attracted to Jesus just as I was. And so there's that sort of missionary.
I'm ready to convert right now.
Where do I send the check?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't even care about money. I thought the world was going to end. And so it was real. And a lot of Christians try to tell me, well, Dan, you weren't really a real Christian or you wouldn't have left. And I make a point in that book and in the other book called Godless, that if I was not a true Christian, nobody is.
And what
And
got you off
even,
the snide?
the Bible even says you shall know them by their fruit.
Yeah.
It's not a matter of whether you judge it to be or not, you know. And my life exhibited all of the so-called fruits of the Spirit. So it was great. And when you're talking with that type of Christian, they're not all like that. I mean, there's a lot of more moderate or liberals, but if you're talking to a fundamentalist or evangelical missionary, you know, proselytizing type like I used to be careful, because everything you say is being forced through this binary lens. They very rarely are able to see gray area. It's either, you know, the Bible even said, Jesus said, you should be cold or hot or I'll spit you out of my mouth. They can't understand. And you might be talking to them in sensible, situational or relativistic or contrafactual. You might be talking in a careful way to them, but when it gets through their grid, it has to go one way or the other. And what you say is either good or evil. And so sometimes you're talking with these people and you don't think you're talking the same language. Well, that's why. Because you guys are used to thinking in probabilities and likelihoods and careful, and I might be wrong, and let's test this. But in their mind, no, it's all absolute. It's all total truth, and they're trying to judge whether you're a good person or a bad person, because there is no middle. There's no such thing as a half moral, half saved or half holy person.
So what we're talking about here actually is a facet of human psychology. That is one of the things that makes it easier for people to navigate through life, is having those certainties. Because when you have doubts, when things no longer are absolute in some way, then problems arise. And people don't like to deal with those kinds of problems. They have enough problems in everyday life. They don't need to feel that they need to reorient themselves in their worldview. Do you think that that's a reasonable approach to understanding why it is that religion has such a powerful effect on people? It's kind of built into us in a way.
Yeah, and religion might be the symptom of that. It might be that we have these sort of, what you might call the righteous mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's human nature. We're tribalistic animals, and there are other parallels besides religion. Sports. Look at when you're rooting for your favorite team, football or whatever.
The new opiate of the masses.
Yeah, there's something irrational that happens where, you know, if your football team wins a game, you have this euphoria, you cheer, you go out and celebrate. Yes, like you could just, like the tribe just won a war, right? If your team loses, you leave the stadium deflated and
as a matter of fact, I just want to throw out one statistic. Sorry to interrupt, but when the home team loses, reports of spousal abuse go up about 10%. And when they lose to a hated rival, reports go up about 20%. This according to the Harper's Index.
Wow. And
so, people do take it seriously.
But what's funny is that most of those players on the team aren't even from your town or your tribe. It's just, there's something in our brain that makes that happen. It's not really connected to, you know, rational, sensible reality. And it's because we evolved in these small groups of maybe 150 people in a tribe, and we were trying to protect ourselves from these other groups out there that were maybe wanting to come in and take our resources or rape our women or kill us. You know what I mean? So we evolved with that defensive sense of identity, and, you know, and the ones who survived and were able to breed were the ones who were more warlike, who were more fighting. Right. And so I think that's a parallel, and I think religion plays into that as well. We have this tendency to think righteously, absolutely. Otherwise, we might risk losing, and we don't even know we're hearkening back to ancient biological instincts. We just think we're in touch with some kind of transcendent
But don't you think, Dan, that it's also a sense of greatness by association? Most people really don't accomplish anything significant in their lives, right? They get a job, they go through life. There's nothing notable about their lives, so they connect themselves to the football team or the Olympic team and say, well, we won the game. But we was, as you said, the people hired from wherever else they came from. The fan has nothing to do with it. When they say they're showing their support as if somehow they're helping the team win, they're doing anything but showing up for the game. So isn't it a sense of greatness by association? I'm better than you because our team beat your team, but I didn't have anything to do with it.
Mickey Mantle eats Wheaties.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Or our God is bigger than your God.
There you go. Same thing in religion.
Anytime.
Yeah, my religion's the right one.
All right. My God rules. I saw that on a bumper sticker the other day. I wanted to talk for another second about religious morality, because I almost never argue about faith with believers anymore. If they can't see that it's a screaming fraud, I can't help them. On the other hand, it's pretty clear that if you are a believer, you have to accept the idea that it's not just acceptable, it's desirable to punish people for what they think. You know, you don't have to cut up your mother with a chainsaw to go to hell. You just have to blaspheme the Holy Ghost. You spend eternity in hell for what amounts to nothing other than a difference of opinion. Is there any more immoral idea on this planet than punishing people for what they think?
Yeah, and that comes straight out of the Bible. The Bible says that a lot. You know, if there's a verse in Deuteronomy that if your son or your neighbor or your daughter entices you to look at another god, well, then they should be put to death. There's no religious
Your hand
freedom
should be
in the
the
Bible.
first upon them.
There's none of that. And then, of course, the doctrine of hell, just for what you think rather than what you do, which really proves that true believers have really compromised their moral judgment. They're not thinking about morality in real terms. But I have to say, and I think you agree with me, that most Christians are good people in spite of that. I think most Christians, most Muslims, most Jews, most atheists, there's even some bad atheists, but I think most of them have risen above those silly ancient differences.
Some of my best friends are Christians. I just wouldn't want my sister to marry one.
On the Tan Talk Radio Network, we're talking today here on the Atheist Forum with Dan Barker, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a national organization with chapters all over the country. And we're going to give Dan a few moments to tell you about that organization in greater detail after we take a few moments to tell you about a local atheist organization called Atheists of Florida. So if you'll stay with us, we'll invite your calls at 441-3000 to join the conversation right here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Vaughn, push the button. Okay, Vaughn's on the phone. So let's add, okay. Go. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Here's a quote from Dan Barker himself from Jim.
Isn't atheism just another religion? No, it isn't. Atheism has no creeds, rituals, holy book, absolute moral code, origin myth, sacred spaces, or shrines. It has no sin, divine judgment, forbidden words, prayer, worship, prophecy, group privileges, or anointed holy leaders. Atheists don't believe in a transcendent world or supernatural afterlife. Most important, there is no orthodoxy in atheism. And that's a quote from, of all people, Dan Barker.
All right.
Dan, would you like to follow up on that?
Yeah, we hear that a lot. Atheism is just a religion, and so
we're just as gullible as you are, in other words. That's a great argument.
Well, I guess if they're saying we're just a religion, is that bad? If that's bad, well, then it's bad for them too.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
it's hardly an endorsement of religion.
Well, actually, as you all know, atheism is the absence of a belief.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
It's like calling good health a disease, right?
It's not a belief, it's a
Yeah.
conclusion, I think is the best summary of religion. I've ever
But
heard.
I'd like to hear a little about your, if I can borrow the word epiphany, your conversion from being an avid advocate of religion to an atheist. After you tell us a little bit about FFRF and how some of our listeners can reach you if they're interested.
So when I left the ministry in 1983, I didn't know really anybody else. In 1984, I started reaching out, and in 1984, I was invited to be on a Oprah Winfrey show in Chicago, and two other guests on that show were Ann Gaylor and her daughter Annie Laurie Gaylor, who founded the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin, in the mid '70s. And we met there, and then eventually Annie Laurie and I got married. We're coming up on our 31st anniversary
Wow.
here, and we. And I joined the foundation right away, and I went to work for the Freedom from Religion Foundation in 1987. And today, Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents. And they started the group back in the mid-'70s primarily because of feminist issues. They were fighting for birth control and abortion rights and women's rights, and noticed that the primary opposition to women's rights was the church. And so their feminism made them start a group that would fight government mixing with religion, because it's not fair that the church would have an advantage being mixed with government. So two purposes of the foundation are to keep state and church separate, and the second purpose is to educate the public about the views of non-theists, which means we're not really a strictly atheist organization. We welcome atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, whatever you call yourself. We don't care. One of the things we say here is we don't care what we call ourselves. We all disbelieve in the same God. So we like the word free thinker. And I think 80 to 90% of our members would call themselves atheists. We even have a few religious people that join because they support our mission to keep state and church separate. And I think on paper, most believers in the United States do support state-church separation. And we are often joined by Jews and Catholics and Protestants and Wiccans and Unitarians and others in our legal work.
At least until you get to Mississippi. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead and finish your thought, and then we'll move on to that one. You probably know what's going on there.
Well, yeah, Mississippi is a big state for us. So on the first purpose of keeping state and church separate, we now have 9 full-time attorneys in the building.
Wow.
We just expanded our building because we were so tight. And then there's often a lot of legal interns plus legal staff. So we have a very thriving legal department. Right now we have 16 active cases in the courts. Yesterday it was 17, because just last night we learned that our victory in California that went before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which we won, the school board in Chino Valley, California voted last night 3-2 not to petition the Supreme Court to go ahead. So the case is finally done. They were praying and preaching during school board meetings, and they fought it, and it cost the school district hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the circuit court made a very strong decision. So we're now down to 16 active cases, because that one is finally, we were worried they were going to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court, and who knows what would happen, with the current Supreme Court.
Exactly.
So we do things like we sued the federal government, we've sued a number of presidents, we've sued Trump, and actually won through a settlement or through an agreement. And we sue local schools, 10 Commandments in front of high schools, public money going to private religious groups. In fact, in New Jersey, we sued over counties giving money to repair churches who said we need it to help our worship. We won the case, and the state Supreme Court of New Jersey unanimously agreed that that's unconstitutional. But they are thinking of asking the Supreme Court to overturn that decision. Same thing in Pensacola, Florida, up there north of you.
Just going to say, yep.
We won a case with the American Humanist Association. We took it together about this huge 40-foot tall Christian cross in a public city park in Pensacola. And we have won at every level so far, and they want to also go to the Supreme Court on that. So It's really exciting times around here. I'm suing the chaplain of the House of Representatives because
Nice.
he
Congratulations.
denied me a chance to open Congress with a secular invocation, even though my member of Congress asked for it, and about a dozen other members of Congress think that I should be allowed to do that. But the Roman Catholic chaplain said no, because you don't believe in a higher power. You can't do that. So anyway, that's before the district, D.C.
David
district,
Koresh should be
federal
okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's right. Well, we actually do that down here. Joe, you're given an invocation.
On the 5th of February, I'll be delivering the invocation for the city of Largo, my third time.
Wow. Well, see, and we use that data. You might even be in our brief. We showed that at least 100 times now around the country, just like you talked about, at city councils, at county boards meetings, and at state legislatures, state, Congress, state houses, there have been non-religious, atheist, agnostic, secular invocations given, and the sky didn't fall.
Mhm.
So
Right.
why is the U.S. House of Representatives any different? Why do they think that someone like me can't come in and solemnize the occasion by referring to good human values that we all cherish and desire?
But of course, what's proposed in Mississippi is really the extremist case, in that they want to mandate the 10 Commandments and pledges to both the state and federal flags mandated to every school child in the public school in the entire state, which of course is the abuse of government power to impose religious ideology and the ideology of a specific religion on the students, to compel them to think that that's the position one must take in order to be the best citizen.
Yeah. Well, the 10 Commandments is Judaism. It's the nation of Israel. So by imposing the 10 Commandments, they're pushing Judaism.
There are
But
four versions of the 10 Commandments. We ought to litigate over which one they're going to use.
And then quit using it.
yeah, that's funny, because you've seen these big Cecil B. DeMille tombstone 10 Commandments all over the
Mhm.
country.
Right.
They made two different versions. They made one for Protestants, and they made another one for Catholics.
Yeah, the second
The one for
commandment.
Catholics, the second commandment is omitted in the one for Catholics, at least back until like the 70s or 80s.
You know, those giant commandment monuments were actually a publicity for the movie, and they were provided by, I think, the Eagles clubs, and the granite company that made them used them to advertise their services as well. So really, they had more to do with advertising and little or nothing to do with religion when they were first put out.
Yeah, and I kind of think that once the movie is no longer in the theaters, the posters ought to come down.
Yeah, right.
Well, Dan, no doubt you're aware of Liberty University President Jerry Falwell Jr.'s claim that it may be immoral for evangelical leaders not to support President Donald Trump. In the interview that he had earlier this month in the Washington Post, journalist Joe Helm interviewed him, and Falwell argued that all Christians should support the president. Those of us who reject religion in our lives just are stunned by the hypocrisy of the idea that they promote unquestionable support for a president who, coincidentally, in keeping with our topic, ignores the 10 Commandments to an extent that we can't even imagine somebody could do. And then, in spite of the fact that the penalties prescribed for violating these commandments, most of which are restrictions, not commandments anyway, is capital punishment. And yet Falwell turns around and says, well, it doesn't matter what he does because humans aren't perfect, and therefore if he violates one or all of them, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the results he gets for the country.
And he ignores more than just the 10 Commandments. He ignores thousands of commandments,
Well, there's
mostly
600 or
civil
something.
and ethical.
But by that standard, of course, Charles Manson is every bit as qualified as Donald Trump, since it doesn't matter what he did; it only matters what God is using him for.
It seems to us that the level of hypocrisy that is that we have in this country for the support of this fellow this president who demonstrates the antithesis of what this Christian religion is all about is so extreme that it's hypocrisy on steroids. We've invented a new word for it, hyperocracy. Dan, someone's called and wants to talk to you. If they want to insult
Sure,
you, we
okay.
get $2. Here on the Tan Talk Radio Network with Dan Barker from FFRF. Thanks for calling in. Hello.
Hello. I'm a first-time caller and periodic listener to your show, so I hope my question isn't out of protocol or whatever, but here it is. Given the current presidential administration, and including and especially the comportment of the vice president, does this period of time for atheists, does it represent, do you sense an opportunity here?
So, yes, of course. And it's not just for atheists. In fact, there's an awful lot of believers, Christians and other believers, even evangelical believers, who are disgusted with the current administration. Our group is not political. You know, we have Democrats, we have Republicans in our party. In fact, there's a lot of Republicans who are atheists. So there's an opportunity in one sphere, but there's a real danger in the other sphere. In the sphere of public opinion and social change, it looks like, even without any efforts of us atheists, it looks like society is progressing. And look what's happened with women's rights and abortion rights and birth control and obscenity laws and gay rights and gay marriage and you name it. The religious right has been losing. Prayer in the schools, creationism in the schools, losing, and they hate it. They're becoming smaller and smaller, and they're getting older and older, and I think they're like a wounded animal that knows it's going down, so it wants to take everything else down with it. That
I've heard
They will
it
charge when they're
referred
wounded.
to as an invasion from within because they feel so threatened by this.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why Jerry Falwell Jr. made those comments, because he knows that there's a lot of evangelicals who are upset with the current administration. My brother, for example, Tom, he's a born-again Christian, a great guy. We disagree about religion and atheism, but we both agree about Trump. And I'm just speaking for myself, not for FFRF here. And he's disgusted because he and I both remember a time when evangelicals and the moral majority and the Christian coalition used to say, character counts. And look what they did with Clinton. You know, your character should count for something.
Right.
But now, as you pointed out before, it looks like the only thing that counts is results. And I've heard some evangelicals even say that Donald Trump is the modern King Cyrus. You know, when the Persians invaded Babylon and they let the Jews go, Cyrus was a pagan. Cyrus was not a believing Jew, and yet the Jews revered and admired Cyrus because of what they did for him. And a lot of evangelicals think, well, okay, Trump is not a great moral example, but look what he's doing for us. He's giving us all the things that we want. So I think the opportunity for atheists here is to jump on this progressive bandwagon that's already happening and make a point that we think character should count. The other sphere where the danger is, of course, is that Trump is very, very effectively packing the courts with conservatives, especially the Supreme Court. So no matter what happens after Trump, those justices are going to be here for a long time. And when groups like ours take cases to get to the Supreme Court, we're going to be stuck with that legacy. And so there's a chance we could go backwards. There's a chance that in the legal sphere, things could get worse. And so I guess maybe that's a little depressing. On the other hand, it gives us a job to do. It gives us something to fight. And as long as there's problems to solve in the world, you've got immense purpose in life.
It's always been my interpretation of take America back again.
Yeah.
You know.
So if I may interpose further, the fact that the evangelical community has seemed to attach, and certainly this administration has seemed to embrace the same, does not really represent a special political opportunity for atheists because you choose not to be political in the strictest sense. Is that right?
Yeah, and we can't be, as a nonprofit group, we can't be. We can certainly comment on any public official who violates the Constitution, or we think does, but we can't be political in that sense. But almost everything Trump does is infused with some kind of religious motivation. And his base, of course, his 100% solid base is, well, it's not 100%, but his biggest solid base are evangelical, white evangelical Christians, basically. especially
Mhm.
men. So a lot of what he does is subject to criticism by watchdog groups like ours. And you know, after this, after the smoke clears and we're left with a much more secular country than we had before, then we're going to be sitting in a good place to try to influence the law. That's why we're moving more toward lobbying in our organization. Last week, I and two of our attorneys were in D.C. for the kickoff reception for the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which is Jared Huffman and Mark Buchan and Jerry McNerney of California, and Raskin of Maryland and others. They're now free thinkers in the U.S. House of Representatives who are either atheist agnostics or religious liberals
Until
who
we
are fighting back.
until
They're
we
fighting back.
demonstrate until we demonstrate that we can remove or install politicians or candidates in office, atheist freethinkers will never enjoy the influence and the power relative to their numbers in the population. We have to learn to flex our political clout, which is why the NRA gets things done.
Well, we're getting closer.
Yes, we
And
are.
these members of the Free Thought Caucus, of course, are always worried about their next election. Some of them came out, like Jared Huffman of California, came out publicly as a non-believer, and it did not hurt his election one bit. Most people really don't care what your religious views are if your other views, social views, line up with what you want. So progressives and liberals and those who support what Huffman stands for, it's like the flip side of evangelical supporting Trump, right?
Right.
They don't care even if they're churchgoers, they don't care if Jared Huffman is an atheist because they like his views. They like what he stands for.
They don't care if he walks down Fifth Avenue and shoots Jerry Falwell Jr. right on the spot.
Right between the eyes.
Okay. Well, thank you for your thoughts.
Okay. Thanks
Such
for
as they
calling.
are.
Good. We had a caller and no insult, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a quick question for Dan, just to digress just a little bit. I understand that you spent a number of years working for a faith healer.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to
well, it
find out
that.
what's the scam with the faith healer. I mean, was she really Sister Sharon Falconer, or could she heal anybody?
So I was a teenager and I didn't work for her. Catherine Coleman, who was out of Pittsburgh, was this big faith healer, and once a month she came to California where I lived, and they rented the Shrine Auditorium. So I was in the choir, in the first choir for that, and I was the librarian for the choir. So
I see.
I met her a couple of times, and I was at all those meetings, and it was a pretty amazing deal. And I sat right in the front row of the choir, just a few feet behind her. So I don't think she would have even known who I was, but we met a little bit. I was just, 16? And there was people coming up and throwing away their crutches and getting out of wheelchairs and crying and saying they were healed. And I used to wonder who would dare question the power of God when you see all these healings that are happening. And it was a pretty amazing thing to be in. I mean, right now I look back at it and see it as theater, but at the time I thought it was reality. And no, there's never been a proved miracle by any of these people. Although some of them do report feeling better, and some of that's psychosomatic. They will just say, "Wow, I do feel better," and the pain is gone, and they'll go home, and then 2 days later they're dead, right?
Right.
But you don't see that.
No,
you
a
don't
friend of
see
mine,
those results.
his brother actually did die. He was a diabetic, and he threw away his medicines, and he died within a few weeks after listening to some faith healer. Needless to say, my friend's not too keen on religion.
Yeah. So I'm glad I went through that experience because the people were sincere. I mean, a lot of them were crazy, but they were sincere and they were there for something.
Yeah.
And it's a free country, and they wanted to get together for this faith healing. But I think there's a danger in that someone like her and other faith healers they're basically practicing medicine without a license. They are basically endangering people's lives, except for the few cases where the healing, quote unquote, really is psychosomatic, and that can be positive. I mean, you can take a deep breath and have a positive attitude and end up feeling a lot better than you did before. So a lot of that happens in these meetings. But
there's no one more
right.
There's no one more nervous than a Christian Scientist with appendicitis.
That's a good quote.
Dan, I'm under the impression that there are actually fewer faith healers out there today. Is that true, or am I not apprehending it correctly?
I don't know. I don't think there's fewer. There might be fewer professionals, but at the level of the church, I think it's still going on really strongly. I'm hearing from people, local pastors and local Christians who think they can lay hands on you and pray. The Bible promises it. The Bible says the prayer of faith will heal the sick. And so, of course, there's a lot of them who still believe that. I don't know if it's true that there's fewer professionals out there. Maybe that is true.
So it all contributes to the general high level of delusion that seems to characterize so much that's going on in our society. People do not have a scientific, rational, or skeptical attitude toward many of the claims that pop up in everyday life, and perhaps they've been overexposed to TV commercials or something. I don't know. But what can we do, generally speaking, to help people toward a more considered life?
Well, a person has to want to. First of all, we can't force that. And
Absolutely.
if they're amenable to rational argument, then you can sit down and talk with them. If they're not, then maybe in a few cases ridicule would be effective, because nobody likes to be ridiculed, although that can backfire. So a person has to want, and I think the only way to attract people is by being attractive. I don't think yelling and being angry and telling them how dumb they are, nobody likes that, and they're going to run away from us if we have that attitude. But if you are a kind, giving, intelligent, moral, loving person who's open to listening to them, and then you keep the door open to dialogue, I think there is a probability. I don't know how high the probability is, but there's a probability there can be some success. It happened with me, and it happened, I bet, with a lot of your listeners.
We also,
as they kind of grew and matured.
We noticed a significant spike in the percentage of people who reject religion in the youngest demographics measured, right? Roughly 18 to, would it be 34? What do you attribute that to, Dan?
Yeah, well, young people like to think for themselves, and all through history. Look at the Massachusetts colonies, the original theocrats. Their grandchildren started thinking, well, I don't want a part of Grandpa's religion. People, young people want to think for themselves. And now with the internet, of course, and the availability of information, and just a total rejection of authority and autocracy that, my grandparents are going to tell me what's true. We are seeing, I think, an organic shift away from extreme religion. I think we're seeing, like you say, at least a third, and some people say even close to a half of the Generation Z are thoroughly non-religious. And that's amazing. I don't know if any of our groups can take any credit for that. It's probably similar to what happened in Europe after so many years of religious fights and holy wars and all that. Most Europeans today are pretty much thoroughly secular. In Denmark, for example, only 4% say they believe in God.
Wow.
And yet they have these very, very happy and very successful societies over there. So who knows what to attribute it to? I think maybe when the older people are dying off more, and they are, the evangelical extreme right are getting smaller and smaller and madder, and the young people are coming along and thinking for themselves rather than taking orders from their parents.
Could it also be the
that
case?
happen.
I'm sorry. Could it also be the case that the increase in democratic governments around the world over the course of the last 100 years or so is part of the background that makes it possible for people to be more confident in their own powers and less in those of the supposed powers of God and so forth? Yeah,
and the growth of democratic governments is a direct result of the Enlightenment values of reason and science and free speech and free conscience and all of that, which we value as, I hate to say Western values because that sort of, sounds...
yeah, because the consensus in this country is just the communists are the atheists, right? And those are perceived as the most dictatorial societies.
It used to be, except now look at the evangelical right and Trump with Russia. Remember when Russia was a horrible enemy?
Sure.
which was
And we were equated with them, right? If you were an atheist, you were a communist. It was just
Yeah.
an automatic association.
Right. It's like sex and violence. You couldn't have one without the other.
And yet now you're saying that it's the democratic societies that allow people to more openly appraise their opinions about these issues and their attraction to them and reject them.
Well, democratic societies are always a threat to the big man, to the big authority, because you look at these regimes, dictatorial or autocratic regimes, they try to suppress freedom of speech, freedom of the press. They try to
punish you for what you
censor. They
think.
try to stop. They try to stop it. They don't want people thinking for themselves because it challenges their power and their authority.
Yes.
And what parent likes to have a bratty child challenging and disagreeing? There's something about authority that makes you want to clamp down. And even the Bible says there are those whose mouths must be stopped. So to me, that's an insecurity. If you really are a good parent, you are happy that your children are thinking for themselves, and you're happy to lose an argument to your own kids, right? But an insecure ego doesn't like that. They have to be in charge all the time. And so democratic societies raise the likelihood or the probability that there will be more freedom of thought and thereby rejection of the religion of their parents.
Well, Dan Barker, we're down to our last minute, and I'm going to turn it over to you to tell our listeners whatever you like about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, how they can find out more about your organization, and why they should want to.
So we are more than 32,000 now nationwide.
Wow.
Atheists and agnostics, and whatever you call yourself. A free thinker is the term we like. And you can join us. You can go to ffrf.org, and those letters stand for Freedom from Religion Foundation, ffrf.org. And we'll send you a bunch of free stuff if you want. A free sample of our monthly newspaper, a huge newspaper each month dedicated to all these issues, including 2 pages of black-collar crimes about priests and ministers who are abusing kids mostly, and other material. And you can check us out. You can become a member, support our legal work and our efforts to educate the public about the views of non-believers.
That's all the time we have. Thanks again, Dan Barker from FFRF.
Thank you,
Tell your friends and worst enemies about the Atheist Forum. Hope you'll join us again next week. And now, along with Joe Reinhardt and Jim Peterson, Ed Golly here reminding you, if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. And join us again next Friday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.